Hey guys, welcome to episode 26 of Better Body Radio. So today it's just myself, Coach Ross Gilmore, leading the Better Body Radio show, talking about the concept or the methodology of deloads. So we'll dive into what deloads are, when we should use them, and who should use them. And then we'll just do a little bit of a wrap up and a summary as well. So if we think about what is a deload, well, let's kind of start off by looking at why we'd potentially use a deload, or more importantly, where a deload fits into like a training cycle. So if we think about the term supercompensation represents, I suppose you would say, three kind of aspects or major phases in the training process. So phase one is, as we know, is going to be the application of stress. So whether that's a neurological stress from, strength training, working at intensities of kind of, super maximal, like, 80% or above 1 rep max. Or it could be hypertrophy. It could be the application of the three different mechanisms of hypertrophy, whether that's mechanical tension, muscular damage, or metabolic stress. And so could also be based on our energy systems. Now, generally speaking, when we talk about deloads, we tend not to look at that in the form of energy system work specifically, because our cardiovascular system is quite robust and it often isn't really required to take deloads per se. Unless, of course, you're doing a lot of high-intensity interval training and a lot of high-intense training, like maybe you're a CrossFit athlete or you're an athlete and you're in competitive season, of course, pushing your body to those sort of boundaries where the muscular systems and the aerobic systems and energy pathways are working at super high levels, then yeah, for sure, we're going to have in season and out of season. But for the most part, in the context of the clients we work with, we're looking at mostly body composition, so a lot of hypertrophy work. But of course, for some of our clients, we do strength work as well. So it's the application of stress. So what does that mean? Well, it can be comprised of the workout in question and everything therein. It can be, for example, talking about applied stress, you can be referring to an individual repetition. You could be talking about an entire set. You could be even just talking about the workout as a whole. So we have to be very clear on what our definition of application of stress is. But if we think about just more workouts and specific exercise in general, we're going to create fatigue, we're going to create muscular damage, and this will then necessitate what leads on to our second phase, which is where deloads fit in nicely to. So we've got what's called recovery. So whether it be active rest between sets, whether it be an entire rest day, whether it be, rest between workouts, whatever it is, or even maybe a week, like we'll kind of get into, the idea is that any form of recovery is going to be based towards making sure that we are able to create a sufficient adaptation for our next workout or our next workout of the same one. So for example, this is why we schedule workouts in a certain order or a certain number of times per week to achieve a certain frequency. And then the idea is to create enough days in between in order to recover from that session, so that by the time we impose the same stressor the next time, we've had an adequate amount of recovery before we do so. But generally speaking, in the context of deloads, this is where deloads come in. We utilize deloads as a way of giving that body that necessary time and recovery in order to be able to regenerate back to somewhat of what we call a homeostatic baseline. And then phase three is what we tend to refer to as supercompensation. It's often sometimes referred to as the rebound phase or whatever else. And that's when the body essentially rebounds back from that fatigue state that we've imposed and is able to perform at a higher level of performance. And this is ideally what we want. The people who are essentially able to get stronger from a neurological adaptation, or whether they're able to grow from hypertrophy, is because they've been able to achieve this supercompensation. Now, how does this relate to a deload? Well, that's phase two, which is the recovery phase, and it's often created with the intention of aiding recovery, avoiding overuse injuries, realizing a higher level of performance. The traditional deload week is often touted as almost, you could argue, like as an essential of everyone's training program. There's a bit of a problem with that though. Is it really essential to take deloads? Is it essential for everyone? I personally don't think so, and we'll maybe dive into that in a little bit. So let's actually get into what a traditional deload week, I guess, looks like. So if you look at a typical deload week, it's loosely based around the idea of one of the following, I suppose, three guidelines. It's either going to be one full and pre-planned week with little to no training stress whatsoever, following 3 weeks of what would have been like relatively high intense training volumes or intensities. So working at high percentages of your workout max, or both potentially, depending on what you do. Like if you train the way I train, and a lot of maybe the guys who follow more of an intensity focused hypertrophy program, for us that are doing a lot of physique stuff, you're kind of pushing volume, but you're keeping volume at the minimum effective dose, but you're really pushing the intensity. And so I run a program at the moment, for example, called Fortitude, and it's something that my coach Callum and I are kind of running, and we're experimenting with, and we're liking it. We're liking what we're seeing from it so far. The thing with Fortitude that's really, really awesome is that you get this super nice balance between pushing super high intensities, going to complete muscular failure, but you also get the volume work, and you also get all the metabolite accumulation and everything else. So it's a really cool program, and so that would then necessitate deloads. But we'll get into which type of deload that would necessitate later once we dive into it. So that's one way that you can do it. You can have one pre-planned deload week in advance. You can ideally, usually within deload weeks, they usually say do not exceed any more than 40 to 60%. So usually the idea is like, right, well, say for example, we say, right, you're working at 90% of one rep max towards the end of a powerlifting block. You would then bring your intensities down to like 45, 50%. And you might also bring your volume rate down as well. So literally all you're doing that week in the gym is you're kind of going in and you're kind of just like greasing the groove, and you're just kind of keeping the movement patterns fresh. Now, that can potentially make sense in a sport where you have to keep skill high, but for maybe someone who's just, looking to really improve their physique and they're really battering the muscular system and the nervous system in order to really force muscular growth, it might not be needed to necessarily go in and just, like grease the groove or kind of do that. You might just benefit from completely taking time out of the gym, but we'll get into that as well. Other things that people often do during the deload weeks, and I know certainly I'm currently, it's funny, I'm recording this, and this was kind of the prompt to record this podcast, is I'm currently going through a 5-day deload at the moment. No cardio, no lifting, no sessions, but what I probably will do is I'll up my self-care routine. So for example, I got a sports massage yesterday. I'll do on each day, I'll do a little bit more mobility than I normally do. I'll do a little bit more soft tissue work, and you get the idea. And it just really, really helps with like blood flow and recovery. And so I'm just doing things which will essentially aid in getting the body into a really good state again, so that by the time I get back into the gym next week to start cycle 2 of Fortitude, I'm raring and good to go, both physically and mentally as well. So what about these recommendations? As much as they're not inherently bad, so to speak, they certainly have a time and place. But I think, like most advice, which is just not the way we work at the Better Body Collective, it's pretty generalized. And the problem with generalized guidelines is that it may work for some, but it might completely miss the mark for others. And so we want to make sure that any form of deload strategy that we put in place meets the needs, the goals, and the preferences of the specific individual that we're working with. And certainly as coaches, and certainly myself as an active coach and our team at the Better Body Collective, we are working with a mixture of different clients. We have a lot of general population who are kind of beginner, intermediate, but we certainly have some advanced clients as well that we work with. And so we're having to be mindful actively all the time of where a deload strategy fits into each of these different types of clients' training programs. So I'm really not big on absolutist recommendations, and very much like with the way we work with everything we do at the Better Body Collective, it's all about that individualized approach. So we've kind of talked about what deloads are, but what are the types of deloads? And there's kind of, in my opinion, 3 specific types of deloads that we're looking at. The one that I would say is the one I probably utilize more with my intermediate and advanced guys, maybe people that I've been working with, for about 2 years plus, who have really got to a point where they can train quite hard with good effort. They know how to take sets to muscular failure. They can maybe lift heavier loads at higher intensities, and just very robust and hard training individuals. I would do what's called an auto-regulatory deload. So all that means is that we're utilizing, their training block and their training log to kind of observe progression over a kind of 6 to 8 week period. Now, the program itself might run for longer than that. I have many clients that programs actually run for like 16, 20, 24 weeks, depending on the individual. But around that 8-week mark, 6 to 8 week mark is usually a point where many of my clients are starting to know some of those signs of fatigue. Now, other ways we can actually start to look at that is we can use health markers to look at that. So we can start to look at the autonomic nervous system through the lens of resting heart rate, through looking at sleep data, like if our clients are going to have like an Oura ring or a whoop strap or one of these kind of biometric pieces of technology, we can start to kind of observe disruptions to things like circadian rhythm and sleep-wake cycles and how much deep and REM sleep we're getting. But for the most part, to be honest, like resting heart rate and the elevation of that is usually, by the time we get to a point where resting heart rate starts to jack right up, like say for example, just give you an anecdote for myself, I literally sit at about a resting heart rate of about 45 to 50, and it sits there pretty much in the mid 45s, like really consistently. And then literally just the day that Cal called my deload. The next day, my heart rate was up to 58. So it was quite a sharp jump up. And then I'd be very interested to see what it's going to be like tomorrow morning. So usually if the resting heart rate starts to elevate, it becomes quite a bit more elevated than normal. That's usually a good sign that the central nervous system needs to back off. And the autonomic nervous system is also telling you a little bit of, right, time to back off, dude. Other things we can look at as well is we can, of course, look at things like blood pressure. If blood pressure, systolic, especially systolic blood pressure is starting to increase, that can also give us a bit of a sign that we're starting to overreach a little bit on our training. So those are things we can do. And so having that auto-regulatory, it can come from feel, but it can also come from both biofeedback, but also from quantitative data as well, if we're able to track it. Forced deload, that's the second type. So we've got, this is what we'd see, like when I did a lot of Olympic weightlifting and I was following set training blocks of maybe like 4-week periods. This is something we would often do, but we've also done the third type of deload, which I'll get to in a second. So a forced deload would be, right, okay, I've planned X week in advance. Okay, on week 4 or week 6, I'm going to deload. I do this because I've built this program up in such a way where I'm going to go hard. I'm going to really build and build and build and build intensity or volume or both. And then by this point, I've either went for like a 1-minute max attempt, or it's been my planned like heaviest week as far as in the kind of mesocycle. Now I know that, and we'll get onto these different types as well. If you look at like Revive Stronger, for example, and you know, Mike Israel, the way those guys program, they run with much more of a volume and higher volume, more working sets, reps and reserve type approach. They would essentially put forced deloads in at the end, like when there's been the kind of, like, I think the last week of the mesocycle, they tend to do like, right, we're going to go to failure here, and then they would drop back. So that's, you could argue that that's a forced deload, but it's not always the case, because you would also argue that their method is actually more representative of the third type of deload, which we're into. But in essence, a forced deload is more for the likes of like powerlifters and weightlifters as part of their preset training cycles. The third type of deload is what we call a reverse deload. So if we look at week 1 of a new plan, it's generally speaking going to be the deload week. Why does that happen? Well, if you look at like some of these planned progressions, it can kind of be sometimes, right, okay, well, say you're doing like the reps and reserve method, like I just mentioned, and you kind of start off at like 4 or 3 RIR, and then from there through the weeks, through the mesocycles, you get to that final week, and you know, maybe that's week 5 or 6, whatever it is, and you empty the tank. You're automatically going to go to a new training phase or block, and you're going to be back down at those 4 reps in reserve. So that in itself creates a deload, because it's a significant drop in intensity potentially and in volume. And I know that some of these programs can also escalate sets across the weeks as well. So as a result of that, you might even be dropping your overall training volume by as much as half, potentially, depending on how the program is set up. So a reverse deload would essentially be a program which is set up in a way where it starts off at low volume, lower intensities. It builds up across the weeks to higher volumes and intensities, or the intensity is more fixed and the volume just creeps up week on week, whether that be through increased reps, whether that be through less reps in reserve, or whether that be through increased sets. And then max out, go back to the start and build up from there again. That would be the example of a reverse deload, which is kind of planned into the overall training cycle. So why should we deload? Well, there's a few different reasons. And generally speaking, CNS fatigue is one. That's going to be especially prevalent if you're someone who's able to really push decent loads. For those that maybe are chasing more hypertrophy specific stimulus, CNS fatigue can certainly apply to you. Like for me, I definitely felt both the CNS and the muscular fatigue side of things, just because fortitude is quite brutal on all aspects. So resensitization to the muscles that we're training is very, very important. So by taking that time away, and you know, we all just experienced this when it came to COVID and lockdown, right? A lot of people kind of went from being, you know, in the gym, used to kind of battering themselves with those loads, and then they were home and they didn't have access to quite as much external loading. And so we almost all had a bit of a, certainly Dubai, it was like a bit of a 12-week resensitization phase. And what you're starting to see now is a lot of people coming back into the gym and they're recomping like mad, because they're kind of in a position where, right, well, all this stimulus now, even like at loads that were 30-40% less than what I was doing before, that's enough to create an adaptation now. And so as people get back to the weights that they were previously doing with a lot of the movements, they're actually going to have new muscle tissue laid down, because that weight that they were using before isn't even required now to get a stimulus. So there's a lot to be said for kind of supercompensation and resensitization. So we may take deloads in order to help resensitize to the training stimulus. I think for a lot of people, what they don't realize as well, though, is that, when it comes to being really dialed into the gym for weeks and weeks and weeks, and some people are just more robotic, but other people notice this a lot more than others, is that it's mentally fatiguing to just kind of constantly push the boundaries week upon week, to really beat the logbook, to progress from week to week with your training. So just it's important just not to underestimate that mental revigoration that happens from just taking a bit of time away from the gym. Another I suppose, utilized aspect for this is that if you're starting to get a lot of little niggles and aches appearing, that's your body giving you, information that it's probably time to back off a little bit and maybe put a bit more emphasis into your recovery, and taking maybe 4 to 6 days, 4 days to 7 days out of the gym, just to really focus on getting the body back to a good baseline again, and really getting, okay, my knees are feeling better again, my back, if it's been your back or your neck or whatever it is, get all the work done that you need to do, whether it be mobility, soft tissue, treatments from a chiropractor, and get yourself ready for the next training phase. And last but not least, for me, the thing I've really loved about this kind of deload period for me, these 5 days, and I'm not done yet, I'm only on day 2, is it allowed me straight away to almost shift gears and focus a little bit more on what are the priorities that I have in my life at the moment. Well, business is huge, and I'm the busiest I've ever been as a coach and with our team and our business. So we've got a lot on our plates as far as managing week to week workloads. So it's been a fantastic time for me to really kind of just let me get my head a bit more back into, or should I say not back into, but be able to give a little bit more time back to the business to really drive things forward. That in itself will provide, not at the time potentially de-stress, but if I can really get ahead of myself and get things done that maybe have been pending or hanging around, I'm then in a position when I go back to training next week that, I feel like I had a really productive week last week, and I really feel like I want to smash on with training. And so we can't underestimate how important it is to be able to take time off the gym and not become so dependent on, well, if I don't go to the gym, then I feel like crap, or I'm going to get fat, or I'm going to, I'm going to lose all my gains. We just have to remember, if we understand the theory, we understand the principles, then we can take our deload, rest assured, knowing that actually by taking that time away, it's going to help us progress even more when we do go back. But not only that, we should be able to, the gym is not our entire life. We should be able to step away from the gym every now and then and place our focus in other areas as well. And just do the minimal effective dose needed at given times to just keep generally healthy and whatever level of strength and muscle tissue we want to have on our bodies. So that's why we should deload. When should we deload? Well, in my opinion, there's no real clear-cut answer to this, but it depends on a lot of factors and a lot of variables. So for most Gen Pop clients, to be honest, generally speaking, they don't really need the deload, purely because, one, they don't train often enough. Many clients just train 3 times a week, and so they're getting plenty of rest already built within their week as far as weights, external loads on the body. Even the ones that train 4 times a week, unless they're going through a really rough training phase, it may not be necessary. And often as well, for a lot of Gen Pop clients, if they're not getting to the point of lifting enough external load, then they're just simply not lifting at the intensities warranted for that CNS fatigue. But don't get me wrong, there are exceptions to the rule. And again, that's why we have to look at things on an individual basis. If I've got a client going through like a really rough, like say transformation, like they've really been going at it for a while, and they've had they might have had refeeds and diet breaks and things like that. But say it takes them, all in all, 24 weeks to kind of get down and up back to maintenance again. It might be that as they get to the end of the reverse diet, that's probably going to be a great time for them to take a week off the gym, for example. But I've had other clients where they've actually got to the end of their fat loss phase, and I've said, listen, don't come into the gym, but just go out for walks. Just stay active, but just don't come in and lift weight. And that's been hugely revigorating for them, taking a ton of stress on the body. And actually, the week they've came back to the gym, while they're still starting to reverse diet up, they've just started to recomp like crazy. So that's just something to bear in mind. As far as advanced and potentially, I guess you would say, more intermediate trainees, it really will depend on the type of training block that they're doing, to be honest. If you're running more of a volume type approach, like I mentioned before, then it's probably going to be a little bit more built in. And so you probably don't need to, auto-regulate when that's going to happen, because your training program is going to dictate that. Whereas if you're following something like I am, where it's based on something like Fortitude or like Dante Trudell's dog crap training, or you're just following a model which is a bit more based on lowest effective dose volume but higher intensities, then utilizing your biofeedback, but also maybe being able to track your health markers, as well as just kind of listening to your body, I would probably say the sweet spot for a lot of people, and I know my coach Callum agrees with this, is between about 6 to 8 weeks if you're following that type of approach. For powerlifters, again, you could either do auto-regulated deloads, or you could do a forced or reverse deload based on your training setup, based on whatever whether it's an intensification block you're following in your training or whether it's a volume-based block. You can kind of make the call based on that. So like I said, I can't literally give you clear-cut answers. It's going to be a case of taking the information and applying it to yourself. And that's it for Deloads, guys. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Just a small shout out to the Better Body team. We are all back in business. We're all back in the gym training hard. We're all back coaching clients at full steam ahead. Coaches Max and Charlie both have a limited amount of availability available. So for those that are listening who are based in Dubai, if you've got some very significant body composition goals that you want to go after, but in a very measured and professional way, then please do get in touch. You can go to the link in our bio on Better Body Collective, at Better Body Collective on Instagram. You click the link there and it will say, you'll see all the little buttons like Better Body Radio and all the other things, and you'll see a button that says work with us. Tap on there and then simply apply for coaching, and we can certainly dive into how the coaching process works, and then we can also schedule a meeting in person to go over exactly that, plus what the investment amount is going to be and what the expectations are in order for you to achieve a successful transformation. Now, bear in mind, guys, we are a business that operates in a very longer term, bigger picture type approach. This is not another 8 to 12 week transformation program. It's very much a case of it's going to take as long as it takes. So the way we work with clients is we map out their individual roadmap for them specifically based on their goal. You might have to go through numerous cycles of coaching in order to get to that real end result. But rest assured that anything we do with you is purely individualized to you as an individual. So last but not least, if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, please do leave us a 5-star review. If you're listening on one of your other preferred podcast stations, you may not be able to leave a review. But if you've listened to the episode, once it's been posted on social media, come on there, comment with what resonated with you most. Show some love on there. Show our guests some love. There's been a lot of incredibly fantastic guests we've had up to this point. I feel very grateful and blessed to have such brilliant minds already come on the podcast. We recently did an interview with Coach Cass and Hansen, which we split into 2 parts. And that's actually going to be our next 2 podcasts up in the series. So please do, if you haven't already, go and leave us a review on Apple. It helps us get this information in front of more and more people. And that's it for today, guys. We're going to sign off there. Have a wonderful week ahead, and we'll look forward to the next time.